who's a Wakili and the head of public law at Daystar University. So, there's been this whole conversation about, the process of impeachment, and we were discussing this earlier with City, the political side of it and the legal side of it. So the deputy president is pursuing the legal side as he also tackles the political side. Members of parliament were presented with a motion by Mwingi Mutuse, in which he listed a number of issues and accusations. And we were asking ourselves here, were the MPs, when they were standing to speak, were they responding to the motion as presented by Mwingi Mutuse, or were they talking about other things that were not even presented by Mwingi Mutuse in his motion? And if you look at it then, what is the Senate expected to look at? Is the Senate expected to look at strictly the charges that the National Assembly is bringing to the Senate, or will the senators also, because it's also committee of the whole House in the Senate, also are they also going to be looking at matters that are not in the motion?
This is the interesting thing, that impeachment is largely a political process camouflaged in a legal clothing. So that whereas the charges were framed in such a manner as to accord with Article 149 of the Constitution and 150 of the Constitution in terms of the grounds upon which the Deputy President or the President can be impeached, the whole process was political. And I listened to some of good minds, some of my very good friends who were politicking on the floor of the House rather than talking about the charges as framed. And again, the framing of charges in and of themselves are only allegations. What is important is the investigations around it and the wealth of, and the evidence that is behind those allegations and the attempt to prove them. So that you can allege that Eric owns a chopper, he owns a helipad, he owns a hotel, and you can even bring the evidence that he's the owner, CR12. You can bring all those things. That's okay. But what are you prosecuting? Trial, that would be something that could be canvassed in a way that's challengeable, cross-examined, and so on. Now, what we're dealing with here are political allegations that are camouflaged around politics, and the impeachment of Rigathi Gachagua was a political process hatched, politically executed through politics and through betrayal inside the assembly and so on. To the extent that people who never even appear in parliament on any normal day, that day they were there, very early. So the whipping of it and, all the canvassing around it was more of a mob lynching than it was even a political process that had any semblance of sanity around it. But the bigger question is, why would the president whip and allow his deputy to be dragged through a process like that? A deputy president who a president who, when he was a deputy president, went through a process that never led to impeachment, even though Uhuru had every opportunity to have whipped people to this point. And he himself had promised that never would he allow his deputy to be humiliated in that manner. So it boils down to trust, it boils down to confidence levels, but it also boils down to our playing up politics at the expense of nationhood.
You see, that's the thing. If our constitution places some constitutional thresholds as grounds for impeachment, and then we say that it's going to be a political process, so we are just going to bring in charges so we can just conform to the constitutional requirement. But in the floor of the House, we are going to bring in all other matters that are not necessarily here in the charges. And even if it goes to the Senate, we can do the same. What's the point?
No, that's the point that you asked. You see, why is Senate... I'm smiling because what I'm about to say, it does not apply in our country. But why is the Senate an upper house? Why is the Senate bequeathed with the responsibility of turning itself into a trial court in the case of impeachment? It's because it is meant to be a place where it will, such matters will be executed with care and duty to the law and the constitution, to the extent that when they arrive at a decision, it should be one that's legally binding as opposed to the politics of it. But you see, if that were to happen, and we want to wait to see whether Senate will behave differently, because definitely MPs were not being fair, they were just being a lynch mob. Senate is expected to turn itself into a trial court and to actually conduct a process that can pass muster, a process that cannot be found wanting in a court of law.
It has handled many impeachment trials.
Yes.
The Senate.
Yes.
Do you have faith that this time it'll handle this impeachment trial as expected of it by the law?
As expected of it, I don't know. I don't think so. But give it to them. There are occasions when they have reasoned, there are occasions when they have done, perhaps made decisions that one would have thought were not coming. In the case of our good friend, the Senator of Meru, twice they were able to give it to them. There are occasions when they have reasoned, there are occasions when they have done, perhaps made decisions that one would have thought were not coming. In the case of our good friend, the Senator of Meru, twice they were able to say, look, we don't have this. But then the third time they said, look, after all these things, we want to arrive at this. And I think maybe they were right at that point. So we've seen the Senator rise. But that doesn't stop us from imagining that they will not degenerate. They will not also go political. And especially if you imagine that the whipping is here, and the Senate is also the place where the constitutional amendments are also coming from, and there is push and pull, because all these things that are happening are a political chess game. So that when you see where the president is sitting, as he's engaging us, very busy with the Gachagua here, the National Assembly here, the Senate here, the other things are going through. Adani is going through. Shah and Schiff are just floating. This morning I've heard he said that this shift is not going anywhere. Nobody is saying that it's going anywhere. We are simply saying, what value does this whole health insurance scheme give to people? If you're asking me to pay for it, for 2,000 bob for optical, what is that? I mean, even NHIF was better. So why move from what is working to what doesn't work? So basically what we are witnessing is that, and by the way, unfortunately, and we've been here before where we've said things that are coming. Unfortunately, President Ruto is entrenching himself to be an ultimate dictator. He wants to be a king, he wants to be a president, and he wants to be a chief. Because having held opposition captive, having held a National Assembly captive, and most likely the Senate captive, we do not have voices that can, come against him. So basically we are dealing with a problem, and the problem that will come to bite us, because the moment you start lynching a deputy president, what will stop us from lynching the president? And remember, we do not have an IBC in this country as we speak. And we do not have processes that should lead us to some organized transitioning. So we are preparing ourselves for animation. We are preparing ourselves for very, very heated times. And we have actually destroyed trust levels in this country to the extent that nobody is going to trust anybody else when they are being promised that, okay, you will be deputy this, you will be prime minister that.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You'll be betrayed. And so people are going to go Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes was an English philosopher, and he said that man in the state of nature does not trust the other man. And that in the state of nature, life is short, nasty, and brutish. Now, when you have a country that refuses to mature 60 years down the line, has a progressive constitution which it wants to cannibalize, does not want to make progress, that country is preparing itself to go back to the state of nature, where life is short, nasty, and brutish, where people, there's a war of wall against wall. People come with ammunition to a table of discussion. So, because if you can't trust you, look at the kind of distrust now that is in the mountain region. They can't sit on a table and purport and say that they can trust they can trust anybody from where we are sitting. So we are having a situation where we are preparing ourselves for discussions that cannot have an end to themselves because we cannot trust that what we agree will be implemented.
Will stay in place.
Yeah.
You mentioned the IBC, and that brings in a new angle,
yes,
which even Wakili Waiko Onyoike had penned down in the papers over the weekend, and is saying, look, the process of if the Senate impeaches the deputy president, he shall cease to hold office.
Yes.
That's what the Constitution says. All right? If cases are pending in court, what happens in that during that period? Does he cease to hold office? Can the president go ahead and nominate a new person to be the deputy president? And if he nominates, what's the procedure of actually getting a new deputy president? So take us through that. What does the law say?
Okay. The law gives the path and gives the days. As soon as he's impeached within 14 days, the president should now nominate the next deputy president, who should be vetted and approved by the National Assembly within 60 days. So that's the Constitution. There's a court process on one end, there's impeachment process on one end. So true, once the Senate says, okay, we agree, Gachagua go home, he can continue his fights, but unlike in the case of a governor, the courts cannot injunct, the courts cannot say stay in office in this case. So he must continue his work.
Why can the courts not say stay in office?
You see, the thing is that where is that provision? Where is that? Because already, by the time, let's agree here.
Okay.
By the time he's impeached, if he's impeached by Senate at 1 minute to midnight,
yes,
or there will be a Gazette notice at exactly midnight.
Yes.
Which is issuing that
vacancy.
Vacancy, and the following morning at 6 a.m. you will see an appointment. Somebody will have been appointed, and the same day, on the same hour, transmission will be in the National Assembly, and the same day the National Assembly will be convening. The Speaker will be convening the National Assembly. Such is our.
But you're saying that there is no legal provision for the courts to halt that process.
You see, the thing is this. We are dealing with a process that's defined in the law. It is saying that the impeachment will happen in the National Assembly and
shall be confirmed
by the Senate. So once the Senate has confirmed it, that process is complete. So what are you injuncting? Who are you injuncting?
It's the same thing that happens in the case of governors, is it not? County Assembly,
yes.
Senate,
yes,
does it.
That's true. We've done that in the case of
Wambora is still served 2 terms.
Yes.
Kawera Mwangaza is still a governor. Is there anything in law that had said that the court can interfere with that process? No. But the courts have.
We are dealing with a very unique situation, and we are dealing with the deputy president. You see, the deputy president, there's a process called a political doctrine, or there's a doctrine called a political doctrine. Matters politics are left to political processes. And in that case, the courts down their tools to not want to be part of the political process. Because what you're dealing with here is not technically a legal process. You're saying that all that the assembly needed to do is raise the numbers, which they have done, standing orders. Now, these standing orders are internal to those houses. When you come to court, what are you coming to say? You are coming to clear your name. You are coming to say, I am not guilty of these things. But the political impeachment has happened.
The question is, what then are you taking to court?
Clearing your name. On the
So clearing your name.
Yeah.
Can you challenge the processes? Because we talked about it earlier on. I said you can challenge the process in court.
Yeah, but you see what has Parliament done? They will purport, they have said they have used their processes, and we know how has been trying to go to court and hasn't gotten any injunction on the process. It's now going to the Senate. Now, what all the Senate needs to do is to follow its process. And again, once the process is being followed, unless it's being violated, the courts will do nothing about it. They will not come and say, we don't know.
But it doesn't stop whoever it is who feels that they require justice beyond what has been meted out in either the National Assembly or the Senate. It doesn't stop them from going to court to challenge the process.
You see, there are two things when you go to court to do. You challenge the process and you challenge the legality of the process.
Yes.
So let's say that Parliament acted legally in looking at what the issues were. Yes, we are saying here that they were more political than they were, but they might even have raised non-issues, but they seem to have had the numbers and they voted, again procedurally.
So what constitutes the legality of the process?
Number one, did they go through the process as outlined that
in the Constitution?
In the Constitution and also in the standing orders?
Yes.
Number two, did they afford the public to participate? They went and did their whatever amounted to public participation. Number three, and you see the problem we have with public participation in this country is that we still don't have a law. So it's either this or that. So it's what you say it is. They even came back with statistics and say the number that said yes and the number that said no. So there is some kind of a semblance of public participation. Number three, did they afford Gachagua an opportunity to come and defend himself?
They did.
They did. Then did they vote on each of the issues or
they
did. And then they finished that. Now, have they transmitted that decision to the Senate within the timelines?
They have.
Done. So if you go to that process, there's nothing much you'll fault.
But Wakili, all that doesn't matter
Yes.
if what is constitutionally laid out as the threshold has not been met.
Which is, in this case,
On those matters, what the Constitution
No.
says as a threshold.
the Constitution says
Serious violation, blah, blah, blah,
Yes.
of the Constitution. Blah. Now, how do you measure that?
now you see this is what I'm saying.
Because that's
that-
one of the arguments
Yes.
that the Deputy President is taking to court.
That's true. Now, this is now the question of interpretation. These guys have brought these charges, and these charges have been ventilated upon in the National Assembly and likely to be ventilated upon in the Senate. Now, what they say is a constitutional violation is what they say, not what is. Because then they are saying gross misconduct and they allege what they are alleging.
Yes.
Now, if you ask me from a legal, technical perspective, they did not prove that. But from their own processes, they only needed two-thirds to say this happened. Now, from them, within their process, they have said it happened. Now, whether they are right or wrong is a political question, not a legal question. So that if you are prosecuting this in a constitutional petition, it will be a very different ballgame. What's the threshold and what? But for them, they are saying if two-thirds agree that this is right, then they have met their threshold.
Two-thirds, and it has been met.
So it's not a very tidy place to go to. But remember this: people can be impeached and still go on in office,
Yes.
like in the case of
Martin Ombora.
or even the case of
Yes.
Trump. Trump was impeached how many times, or even Bill Clinton was impeached how many times.
But you see, this is the point.
Theirs was not confirmed in
Yeah.
the Senate, remember?
That's the point.
But someone's impeachment is confirmed and they're still in office, and yet you say the process is complete. So essentially, our process is incomplete.
In the
Even
case
if we
of
go to
governor,
Senate.
I think we have it. The process is clear.
And that's what I'm seeking to
Yeah.
understand. When you say that is different from the Deputy President, I don't understand. How is it different?
You see, we have not said in the Constitution, we have not given the courts the power to intervene or the power to interpret in the case of the president or the deputy president. Because we have said these are people's appointees, or these are people who are elected by...
How is that different from governor?
How is it
But
different
you
from a
see-
member of parliament?
A member of parliament...
Let's even go to governor.
Governor...
How is it? Which part of the law distinguishes
Yes.
how you impeach a president
Yes.
from how you impeach the governor in terms of the courts coming in?
The point about the governor is about, again, process. Now you go back to the county assembly. Did they? And if you realize, a lot of times, whether the Senate upheld the impeachment or not, it was whether the county assembly had followed its process
Yes.
and had completed the legalities and met the thresholds. So where the county assembly did not get it, the impeachment in the Senate was overturned
By the
in
courts.
by the courts.
Yes.
So this time round, if you remember, twice
So same thing can happen
can happen.
in the courts with regards to the process in the National Assembly.
And that's why, yes, and that's why the National Assembly was busy trying to fix and to cure all and any possible loopholes that could have been used to impeach their decision by carrying out all those processes, going to the people, and so on. So at least they can say they have done their bit. Now, Senate can actually call into question that and can say, we are not satisfied. Because now Senate is converting itself into a court. It's a trial court. It's a high court status at that point.
It's going to be an interesting couple of days. We'll invite you to come so we can look at it as it's unfolding. Yeah. Dr. Martin Olo is advocate, head of public law at Desta University. He's been our guest. Keep it here for more. It's 8 a.m.
It's now 8 o'clock with Safaricom.